Hello everyone, this is Master Viktor Neustroev. Today we are going to start our workshop. We're going to talk about creation of difficulties for our opponent. So the topic is creating difficulties, maximal difficulties. So for example, when you are in a trouble, you think your position is worse, you are under attack. What we should do to not lose the game immediately? How can we create problems for our opponent and not lose the game or provoke him to make a mistake? So this is what our um, uh, topic is about. Let's wait for more participants to join our study. To join our conference. Okay, I see people are joining. By the way, you can share what new happened in your chess life. So, did you play any serious tournaments? Did you, how you work on chess? So, I know that some of you attend my group classes that we are doing on Fridays. Also, next Friday will be the last group class of that cycle devoted to how to attack and defend. And then I will announce a new cycle. It's a 3 month cycle where we are going to work on your endgame techniques. So, how to improve your endgame. This is what we are going to talk about on our next group lessons cycle. Okay. So people are joining. Well, this week I didn't send the announcement of this workshop in time, so my mistake. However, I sent it a few hours ago, and you should receive together with the link. So let's wait for a couple minutes and then start. What do you think? Okay. So before we start the analysis of this game, this is the game between Akib Rubinstein and Savili Tartakova. Let's discuss what it means. Creation of maximal difficulties for your opponent. Well, in during the game, both players initiate certain plans, and it does make a lot of sense to prevent your opponent's plan if you think that this plan is dangerous. So the prevention or preparation for the enemy plan is a very common universal tactical, not tactical, but strategical approach. For example, we can execute this approach once we are defending our king against attack. Or, for example, once we are defending our position against a pawn storm. Doesn't matter, either it's a pawn storm on our king or a pawn storm on the other side, for example, on the queen side. We can also defend our pawns or pieces from the enemy attacks. So this is where we should use this approach, creating maximal difficulties to our opponent. This position, it was a Scotch game. So by which means can we create difficulties to our opponent? Well, first of all, we can expose the enemy king and initiate a counter attack, or even do a perpetual check. We can exchange attacking or potentially dangerous enemy pieces. We can locate our pawns in a flexible way. So once, for example, they advance the pawn on the king side and offer in exchange, we can avoid it and block the pawn structure, and this is how they won't be able to open the files to attack our king. We can evacuate the king from that dangerous area, or we can just build a fortress. Another possibility is to simplify and pass the game to the endgame if we believe that that endgame is either equal or drawing. Well, this is a very common approach, and let's start learning it on practice. So let's take a look at this position. Well, it was Scotch game, which is, well, the knight captured on c6. I don't know how this knight got to b3. Anyway, what do you think? Here, white is behind the development and must castle, accepting some difficulties. But what do you think? So g3, bishop g2. Yeah, I originally thought about this option, but then I realized that after bishop a6, what to play? You cannot move the queen. Well, technically you can, but I don't think it's promising. So, for example, what if they play f5 here? You cannot capture en passant, and you cannot move your queen and keep protecting the pawn on e5. And then you lose on e5. If the queen moves away, you lose there. So, no, queen h4, you mean queen h5? Well, there is still a pin. I don't know how they play actually, but I think that g6 looks interesting. Knight f6 doesn't look promising. It's an attack on the queen, but okay, just d6. And you have to play f4. So, well, in my opinion, it's risky. So you can play c4 instead. This is less risky. And you should understand that you are not attacking the knight because there is a pin. So they, for example, play this move, you play that, they do this. And then what? If you castle, well, the pawn is still poisoned. Well, they can try knight b4 and then capture it. Because if you want to save the pawn on e5, sooner or later you have to play e4, which means that it's either illegal if you already castled, or if you want to try it early in the game, then you cannot castle to the king side at all. So c4 is safer, but still there are problems with castling because the pawn on e5 requires protection. That's why white wants to speed up his development by castling to the other side. However, because the pawn is already there, there is an open file, castling to the queen side was risky too, but allows quickly to consolidate pieces. So bishop b6, otherwise knight takes there. So was it better to take on c5 first and then castle? Maybe. But in the game it was castle king side, so they wanted to keep this knight alive. And now c4. c4, well, bishop a6 is a possibility. In the game it was played a4. Because if c takes d4, it's this, and the a file is open. Moreover, there is no chance of playing this move because of rook a3, which leads to a checkmate. So rook a1 is already a mating threat. That's why there is no intermediate move like d6. And this is a game over. So unfortunately, after a4, the knight has to go to a1. But it's not a big issue. Later, the knight goes there. a3. So what's your opinion? What you should do? Take the knight? Take the pawn? Play b3? Or do you have any better suggestions? Brian, can you please specify, can king b1 be played against instead of h3? You mean instead of b3? Because h3, I just don't understand what's the purpose of this move. Are you talking about b3? Ah, instead of a3. b3. Wait a sec. So you mean instead of this move, it's better to play king b1? Yes, I think it was a possible move. However, the game continues like that. a4, the knight goes. Well, this time I'm sure you prefer c1. And they can still play this move in order to capture the pawn on e5. And then you set queen h5. Probably queen h5 saves the game, but queen e4, for example, fails because of the same move. And now, you see, you lose the pawn on e5. But queen h5 looks interesting. I don't think g6 is a good move because of queen g5. What else? Well, first of all, there is no promising attack. The queen on h5 is okay, but the f2 is hanging, so probably not. Queen h5 isn't so good. When the king is castled to the queen side, the queen has to protect too many weaknesses. So I think c4 is a must. Okay, so there is a nice suggestion by Erosh. Don't take the pawn, not the knight. So no the pawn, not the knight. Okay, so Erosh. Okay, we understand what we shouldn't be doing, but which move do we have to play then? b3. Well, I originally thought that yes, b3, but look at this move. You weaken this diagonal, so bishop b4 can be played. Then knight c2, bishop b2, king b1. Well, it looks really risky, so I don't know. Knight c3 right now? Well, it seems yes, because otherwise the knight is simply captured. So knight c3, bishop takes, bishop takes. Look at your dark squares. If they can somehow bring the queen, you lose. So f4 probably, but it seems that white has serious problems with their dark squares. So taking the knight doesn't work neither. So this time, this is a fork. So we have to take, otherwise they take on a1 and then bring the queen, or take on d5 just. So we have to take, but they bring their queen anyway, and then capture on c2, a2 I mean, and it's over. Like that. So capturing the knight was definitely a mistake. b3 seems playable, but there is a complex of dark squares weakened. That's why white plays knight c2, covering d4, attacking the pawn, not really attacking the pawn, but moving the knight away from the corner. A takes b2. And what was the white suggestion here? What white was relying on? If he takes, the b file is open, the dark squares are open, and the king is the object of the attack. That's why here they decided to hide their king behind the enemy pawn. So this is a very common strategy when the enemy pawn being into your camp can defend your own king. So remember this feature. Every time they do so, you shouldn't take, because it exposed the position of your king. Moreover, this pawn in the endgame is a weakness, and in the endgame you will definitely take it. What you have to pay attention to are such moves like rook a2, king a2, some check on the a file, and rook a1, and so on. Or maybe such checks like that. But looks like right now it's not possible, and at any moment we can capture on b2. So it looks good, especially because this knight is trapped. There are no squares available. So this is attacked twice. This with the bishop, this with the pawn, and the b6 is occupied with the bishop. So d6, take this. Well, if they take there, I think it's a... Well, they would have a compensation here, but not sure if this compensation is enough. If they try something like that, this time we play queen e4, bishop f1, rook f1, it also looks fine. That's why they decided to do the second wave of the attack by playing bishop f5. Okay, black can still attack bishop a5 into the dark squares. Wait. In case of bishop a5, we take, then the bishops are exchanged, so the dark squares are not so weak. So let's continue with the analysis. The second wave. What is the threat of this move? For example, if we decide to play this and maybe then this, we are in a trouble after this and rook a2. So they double, and we experience serious issues with our king's position. That's why how to play here. Okay, so please think about this position, and I will rewind back and we will talk about it. So this, then bishop a5 was a suggestion. So I don't fully understand why it allows the knight to escape, because I can just capture the knight. And you cannot hide your, I mean, you cannot land on a3. There is a knight. Okay, I can do that too. There is a fork, so now I capture. And the queen still doesn't land on a3. Okay, here we are. How to play. Okay, so well, queen h4, you mean queen h5? Ah, yeah, queen h5. But then bishop c2 and rook a2. This is the biggest problem. Ah, you mean black should play queen h4 and queen a4. You mean somewhere here? Well, then f4 can be done. Because even if I can take with a queen, but even if I take with a pawn, queen a4, is it so promising? Okay, so bishop c3 is a must. So we are protecting here. That's why if they take, we take with the queen. a2 is still protected. And we are ready to take on b2 with the bishop. So c takes d5, e takes d6, queen takes d6 was still the best way, but black here loses. However, they made another mistake, rook f e8, which is quite slow for such an attack. g4, bishop g6, and f4, trying to trap the bishop. Now white is attacking. There is also an extra knight, and the game is actually decided. Well, rook a3 was played. It's not, well, it's not a hanging piece because this knight is pinned and the bishop is under attack. But just bishop b4. I'm sure it's also possible just to take on b2, but they decided to keep the pawn on b2 to get the king hidden. Also, there is a pin there. So rook a3, queen d2, bishop finally takes, queen takes, c takes there, and bishop d3. So black is a piece up. What they need to do is just to simplify the position, avoid problems, secure the king, and that's it. c5, bishop d2, rook h3. What the game was over. Let me just quickly show you what happened. This, threatening to take. g6, creating an escape square. Bishop c6 attacking there. So take, the rook becomes active. Now we can double, for example. Well, queen f6 was played. Let's take on d5 first. Bishop goes to c7 to chase the rook away, but g5. Queen goes to the queen side. And finally, bishop f7. With the queen going to c4. Now what? Well, the king goes there, then the queen goes to f7, and there will be a checkmate on g7. That's why king f8. Well, how to play in this position? White sacrificed material back, but the king is really weak. Queen e6. So you want to trade queens. But wait a sec. So if you play queen e6, you trade queens. Oops. This is a mistake. So if you play queen e6, you trade queens, but you sacrificed, white already sacrificed the bishop on f7. Now there is no material advantage, and the d2 is hanging too. So just simplifying won't work for white anymore because they sacrifice the bishop and there is no material advantage. So, of course, this sacrifice on f7 wasn't obligatory, so it was possible to play something else. Actually, what something else? Because everything is hanging. Maybe bishop g2 was possible, attacking the rook and keeping, well, and yeah, bishop g2 was playable, so they take, we take, and this is fine. If the rook moves to attack on d2, just rook a2 is okay. So, but bishop f7, this is what white consider it to be the best option. And how to continue the attack? Okay, thanks, Arush. It's rook e6. That's right. The rook goes to f6 and the queen invades f7. So, for example, if they save their queen, queen b7, let's say attacking here, then rook f6 check. Doesn't matter where the king goes. It should be over. So, king h8. And how should we play here? Well, if the king goes to e8, it's checkmate in 1. But in case of this... Oh, I think that not queen f7, but rook f7 works this time. Because if king h8, we deliver this check first. Take, rook d4. Well, it should be winning. Let's play with the rook. So what do you think? Rook d1 or rook a1? Threatening a mate. Or rook d1 works. Well, it's a winning position anyway. I like this move. So king g8. And what can I do then? To avoid blunders, I can take on c5. And if this move, I bring the rook again. And then take on d4. Something like that. Should be winning. Fine. So why... let me quickly check if there is anything else. No, I don't see. Why they don't play rook d6 here? They can, but then rook h e1 and you're threatening with checkmate on with your rooks on the 7th rank, the 8th and the 7th rank. So in the game they played rook d2, allowing this, and this is a winning position. White has enough material advantage. Also with rook e1, there will be a mating threat on e8. So I even don't know what is better. Take the bishop or threaten checkmate. Maybe take the bishop. So that's why rook d6 wasn't played. So this is how the game ended. But why I decided then they can exchange rooks and bring the queen back. Who can exchange rooks and bring the queen back? What do you mean? In case of rook d6. So do this and then bring the queen back. Where? For example, here, right? For example, here. Well, but then still this. And if king g7, it's still this. So king g8 is not possible because of a discovered attack. At least rook c7. So king h8, and then we can continue with this move again. So take, the queen goes that way. No, it didn't work. Okay, so why I demonstrated this game to you? So definitely here, white was in trouble. In order to create maximum difficulties for black in their attack, white decided to do this prophylaxis. So after a3, they played knight c2 and moved the king to b1. Now, with the pawn on b2, attacking the white king is more complicated and requires more efforts. And also there is a problem with the knight on d5, which is trapped. Okay, fine. Let's take a look at this position. White is about to do the attack, for example, with this move, with this. Rook e1 to keep also black check. Okay, just let me quickly answer. When rook e1? There was on previous between d1 and e1. Okay, so it's okay. Let's continue. Let's continue with this example. So rook h3, rook g1, and then g4. This is what they are going to do to attack on the king side. What do you think? Which difficulties can Capablanca create here to make the white's plan more complicated or even unachievable? H5 and G6. Well, H5 and G6 I think is not bad, but H5 and G5 probably is. So this is exactly what he did. For example, if he continued with this move and then did a pawn march on that side, probably it should be fine too. This is a possible plan. Because of the pawn on c4, black has extra space on the queen side, and doing the attack on the on that side of the board would be promising. So, but before doing this, in order to prevent black from doing their plan, they play h5. So rook goes to f1 and rook h6. So it stops h3, g4 at least. Bishop e1, they want to occupy dark squares. Now g6, so this is a very solid defensive setup. Bishop h4 and king f7, removing the king from the danger. Queen e1. Well, here I think both bishops are bad, but probably this one is a little better, because this one is not doing anything on this diagonal, and on other diagonals it's totally blocked by the pawns. Yeah, I think since then the black's position is better, because now they can do their original plan. Once they build a defensive setup on that side and prevent any counterplay, they can keep playing on the queen side and take advantage of their extra space by doing a pawn march. Bishop c6. So why? Well, to open the b file. Rook h3. Well, white tries to play on the king side. a5, bishop g5, rook goes back. Queen h4. Well, in my opinion, that was already a mistake. So here, white overestimates his position, thinking that, okay, so it's fine. There probably can be a chance to succeed with the attack. Maybe by doing this sacrifice, maybe by sacrificing a rook on h5, or maybe the bishop on h5. This is what they are relying on. But no, the king is relatively safe, and sacrificing the queen doesn't make sense. It's white is unlikely to have enough material to checkmate them. So b4, opening the position on that side. Then black realized that they're in trouble and they transition to the defense. Rook b8. Now this rook goes back. What do you think? How black should continue in this position to take advantage of extra space on the queen side? Why should try to initiate a break on the e file, but how is it possible? E4 is attacked 3 times. So this, and then I can set the bishop on d5. Now I think a4 is just a pawn loss, and it's not possible to open the position by doing e4. Which preparation? So black should double the rooks. Well, that makes sense. It's not the very best strategy, but it does make sense. What else? Double major pieces with... Okay, so even if you do so, like that, then e4, take, bishop takes, I take with my bishop, you have to sacrifice a rook, but the rook is too much. So I think if white wants to succeed with the attack, they should play this, but the king is not well placed, so king g1 back, then h3, g4. However, it's not sufficient. He's taking the pawn bad, this pawn. Well, and what then? h3, g4 looks risky because the king is on the h file. So moving the king to g1 and then doing it and maybe supporting the king with major pieces could help. But again, so this can be just ignored because capturing means the e-pawn takes and the pawn structure didn't really change much. Capturing there means the rook takes and still the position is closed. So that's why I don't think this plan is possible at all. Well, this is what white could try, hoping for a mistake for that black can potentially create. Okay, so Georgios suggests a very good plan, a4, a3, to exchange the pawns. That's right, a4, a3, this is exactly what was played. So rook goes there and then a3. Why it is a good idea? Well, first of all, you're threatening to take there and then invade the enemy camp. So a3 acts like a pawn which supports your outpost. Second, you can take there, then take here. If they take, then you can capture there. So queen takes and rook e8. Of course, you win this pawn. And then look at the position. You have a protected pass pawn on the c file, which is quite close to the queen square. They have a distant passed pawn on the a file, which at the same time is the object of the attack. So, for example, capturing, doubling the rooks, and it will be very hard for them to save it. So maybe it's possible to do with the queen, but it's also possible to bring the queen to attack a2 one more time. Here in the game, it was played b3. Oh, by the way, some of you may consider doing this instead of a3. Well, it's also common, but look, if a3 is played in this position, all tactics that you can rely on is a sacrifice on a3, which this time doesn't work because they cover the b1 square, so you're a piece down. So if there was no bishop and you see that b2 would provide you with some advantage, yeah, then yes, b3 is playable. But if you see that then you are stuck with your plans, then don't play b3. Play a3 instead, or capture on c3 and then play a3. Okay, b3, take, bishop takes to keep the pawn there, to not make the a pawn a passed pawn. But bishop b5, it's a double attack. Rook g1, queen c3, and they lose a pawn. Rook c2, trying to win it back, but there is a black rook here. And now white decides to bring their dark squared bishop back to the game. If, for example, let's say rook here, then the rook there to attack on c3, the bishop here is enough, and then bishop d3 becomes a threat. So bishop h4, bishop d3, rook c1, and how to win in this game? What do you think? It seems that black should be winning. They have extra pawn, their pieces are more active, their pass pawn are far advanced, but how exactly to win? So you should promote the c or the a pawn, and in order to do this, you have to sacrifice the exchange on b3, and then yes, it's winning. After a2, white resigned. Why? No, because of this move or because of this move. For example, bishop a1, attacking here. Here you can continue with bishop b1, and if they take with a rook, well, you can take, of course, but then you cannot promote, or you can promote, but then you lose a rook. So just play this, and then nothing can stop you from promotion. Well, actually, there is something. He can sacrifice and then play bishop c3, but then you are 2 bishops up. So bishop c3, you sacrifice there and then do this, and it's still winning. So they can probably win here, but still bishop and the queen are better than 2 rooks. However, now you have to attack the king. So probably this should be the next move. Or maybe let's take a few pawns. Okay, fine. Doesn't matter. It's winning. Well, if rook a1, then c2 works. And if they take, you do this. If they play something like this, for example, bishop a3 works. This is how black managed to win. So, well, why this game is so important, why it deserves our attention. So white is going to attack on the king side. This is quite obvious. The pawn structure is almost symmetrical. However, black has some advantage. Their pawn is already on c4, which provides black with extra space, which means more room to coordinate pieces and prepare them for a breakthrough on the queen side. So the only logical plan, well, because of the pawn on c4, it's unlikely that white is going to play on the queen side. For example, b3, a6, bishop a4, b5, the bishop is trapped. So that's why they are likely to play on the king side with these moves. And in order to prevent this, in the form of a prophylaxis, black decides to create a defensive setup which creates maximal difficulties for this kingside attack with h5, rook h6, g6, and king f7, preparing to evacuate the king if needed. And only then he switches to the king side, to the queen side play, advancing pawns and open the b file for the rooks. Okay, let's continue. Well, looks like a terrible position and white is completely winning. What do you think? Okay, so well, it's black to move here. Those of you who joined us recently, we're on this event, we are talking about creation maximal difficulties to our opponent's plans. For example, here white is attacking. They developed a serious initiative. The knight on d5 is powerful. The bishop is really good. Well, the pawn is ready to get to f6, and then we have to take, I don't know. Well, maybe g6, but then g7 is a weakness, and doing queen f4, queen h6 can lead to a tragedy for us. Black must act fast. They should find a defensive mechanism and to try to trade enemy pieces off or to prevent attack. Brian, can you please specify what features? What is your question? I didn't fully understand it. Okay, so knight d5, bishop to g5, and bishop to h6, trying to defend g7. Okay. Okay. So your question was about the previous game. What features were good for white? The kingside attack. So their pieces were better prepared for the kingside attack. Error suggests knight d5. But how knight d5 works? So let's say they take with the c pawn, and then what? Bishop g5 like then suggested, for example. Oh, f6. It's interesting. Okay, so knight c6 to transfer to e5. I think it's too slow. Let me see. So knight c6. They can try f6 already. So capturing isn't a good idea. So g6. Oh, this time you cannot let them take because this pawn is protected. Maybe you can try knight e5, but well, bishop f5, then this, and f7 is vulnerable. Let me see. So this, should they take or not? Actually, they don't have to. So this move. And then something like that is coming. Okay, let's listen to, well, let's follow the arrow's suggestion of capturing, c takes, and then doing f6. It looks quite solid. But, oh, there is a problem with knight d4 move. The knight goes to e6. So probably because of that, it's better to keep the pawn on f7. I also like Dan's idea of doing this. However, they don't move the rook, they play queen g4, and you have to play this. But it seems to be losing. F6 now? Maybe, actually, maybe. Well, yeah, f6 drops the queen. So I was thinking about doing this, and then f6, but we should move the queen. Yeah, bishop h6 works. Okay, so it works. What did black play here instead? Instead, they voluntarily played bishop f6. This is also a kind of a defense, because now the king may escape to e7 if needed. The king on h8 is safer, and we exchange the enemy attacking pieces. So bishop takes f6. It will open the king, but does white have enough resources to attack? Let's see. It seems not. Well, it's risky, but this is protected. The king can be hidden there. What else? There is e5 square. So, for example, the queen on e5 can start attacking the king and maybe capture the pawns if the king is relatively safe. So, king h8, rook f4, rook g8, rook h4, rook g7. So, for now, black is holding. Knight goes to d4, queen e7, knight goes there, knight d7, knight f4. Well, and in this position, I think that black survives. Why? Well, knight g6 isn't a threat, right? So knight g6, f takes g6, f takes g6, and then even if you take on h7 with the pawn, it's okay. The pawn will be covering the king on h8. So Brian suggests to move the king to the c file. White has g4, rook h3. Yeah, but I don't think it works. I think it doesn't work because just one defensive move defends the h7. It seems that there is a strong attack, but the black defensive potential after we exchange this bishop and the knight on d5, the black's defensive potential increased. So, for example, well, the game continued with this move. It wasn't the best option, but let's say I just play a random move. So g4, well, another random move. So this, let's say queen e4 is not a check. Now there is a mating threat of sacrificing the queen and then doing checkmate with two rooks. But I can play this move, and it seems to be sufficient. So knight g6 still makes no sense, yeah, because h7 is protected enough. There is also a threat. So tripping major pieces on the h file isn't so promising as it looked like. Well, king g8 was played in the game. Why? Well, to be honest, I don't know. I wouldn't play such a move. Queen h6, rook e8, knight h5, attacking here, but rook goes to g5, and this is where white could play for a win. What do you think? How? H3 rook g4 to exchange the rook, but wait a sec. So h3 rook g4, let's say you even take, but then I take with my queen, and you can play f6. This is the idea, right? Yes, it does make sense. So queen goes there, queen g5. Okay, so yes, but no, actually, this I can just take. Okay, after this move, yeah, it looks interesting. So, no, queen f6 cannot be played. There is a... This move doesn't work neither. So, because it's a queen sacrifice, and then what? Knight f6, okay, fine. So I can move my king there, and if you play rook h7, I take there, and then escape to e5. So queen h7, no, but yes, white is keeping an eye on queen h7. Yeah, let's talk about h3. So h3, let's say I cannot move the knight because of knight f6. I cannot move my queen because of knight f6. Isn't it a Zugzwang? Oh, I can move the rook. It's not. Okay, and they cannot play this move because of knight f6. Because if knight takes f6, it's queen g5. If queen takes f6, this time it is a checkmate. Because if the king was on g8, the king could escape to e7. So h3, okay, rook a8, for example. Rook g4. Rook takes g4, h takes g4. Yeah, and then you're threatening with g5. I think h3 works. Maybe queen e5 here first, and after this move, I can try to deliver perpetual check. What do you think? Because this is a blunder. Then I can checkmate with knight e5 and queen f2. And keeping the king on the first and the second rank is likely to lead to a perpetual check. Maybe rook e1 here can be played, but again, it seems to me it is a perpetual check. So yeah, I have so many ideas. Well, I was thinking about doing this, and in this position, I wanted to play rook f5 to take the queen. Nice geometry, but the g5 rook is pinned, so I cannot take the pawn. Okay. So queen b1, queen d3, it's the simplest way to continue. With this move, then... Oh, there is a checkmate on g7 also coming. No, I think I can play like that. Oh, I can play like that, this, and then deliver a check. So rook f2, queen g4. So you can take on f6, but it's not checkmate. And there is no checkmate on g7. And even rook h2 doesn't make sense. If, let's say, I lose a tempo, this works, but it's not as strong as it could be. So, for example, king moves away. Why don't I take here? Well, I actually can take here, right? So, and then after knight g4, rook g4. So queen e5, queen b2 seems like a defense. But in this position, they could play rook c3, attacking there. So for example, rook c8. The rook is distracted. Now rook f3. And this rook goes to f4. And after that, the rook can go there. Maybe in this position, knight f6 already works. But even this move is enough. Because after this, it's knight f6. How does it work? So if queen takes, it's checkmate in one. If knight takes, it's rook g5, and you have extra exchange. White has extra exchange, and this time there is no perpetual check because the king escapes. In order to prevent it, in this position, instead of moving the king to g8, which was not required at all, it was better just to play c5. So queen h6, rook a g8, for example, knight h5, taking there, rook goes back. Now rook f3 with the same plan, but queen e5. And after this move, this will be never played because I have two rooks already prepared. Such a strategy won't be possible in this position. So, for example, rook c3, rook c8, rook f3, king h8, rook f4. No, here king h8 is already a mistake because knight f6 can be played. So knight takes, queen takes. That's the reason. So king h8 wasn't possible. Okay, fine. So anyway, the game continued with rook f4, and the white's attacking potential is over. Now king h8, of course, can be played. There is not enough pressure on the h file. h4, rook gg8, and they start maneuvering pieces. Black activated the queen, and then after repetition, they agreed to draw. Nominally, white is slightly better in this position, but it looks like a fortress. And the key idea of building such a fortress was to exchange the bishops. So first exchange the knights, but that was on the surface. However, exchanging the bishops is not. Having the pawn on f6 would allow the king to escape, as well as would neutralize the activity of this bishop. Let's continue. White has an attack. The b2 is hanging. What do you think we should do in this position to create difficulties for the white's plan? Bishop a2. Well, I didn't consider this move. I did consider queen b2, but bishop a2 didn't come to my mind at all. Okay, so you lose the g6 pawn. I actually thought that you'd better defend on g6, because now f takes g6 and like queen h. Well, queen h7 is not a problem actually. Maybe it's not so bad. What then? So maybe now this, but they can try to exchange pieces through this. So knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes. It's a check. So there, check. Rook f1, and seems to be risky. d5 is another suggestion. Let me see d5. What if they take on? Well, they first take there, attacking the bishop, and then they take on d5. No, d5 is unlikely. Knight f5 after this. Yeah, knight f5 is also a plan. So, well, definitely losing the pawn on g6 or exposing the king's position and allowing them to play knight f5 is a mistake. How can we prevent it? What do you think? Knight d7 to knight e5. So maybe it's so slow. And then there is no knight covering this, so you have to move the bishop, and then I can play, well, maybe bishop a2, and then I can play this with similar ideas. So take with the queen, bring the queen back, check on h7, bring the rook to the f file. It's not absolutely winning, but looks like black experiences serious issues in that line. Bishop e8 better. Okay, so don't you lose immediately? This is over, so probably this, then knight f5, knight c4, and then queen e7. Yeah, this is winning. So how to avoid this trade? What do you think? I think if you keep the files closed, if you do not let them to exchange your pawn on g6, you are likely to hold the position. Yeah, knight h7, and on the next move, g5. Okay, let's take a look at king h7 move. I want to do a rook lift. Not sure if it's a good idea, but I want to try. Okay, I can take, and then play knight f5, and I'm threatening there. I'm threatening to take there. Maybe there is a better move. Okay, take knight c4, and then rook e3, rook h3. Yeah, something like that makes a lot of sense. Fine. So no, king h7, knight h7 is better, because then after g5 we avoid the trade of pawns. Knight d5. So taking means lose the control over the light square. So queen goes to d8, protecting there. It also stops f6 in future. h4, undermining. But this is not a hanging pawn. It's always possible to take with the queen and trade queens off. That's why black continues with rook takes b2. Bishop e3, adding more pressure. G takes h4. So f6 is still not playable, because there is an attack, and if knight takes, there is a queen, so the queen is defending. And if, for example, something like rook f1, it's queen g6, offering a trade. Because there is no bishop f4, there is no queen. Well, queen c8 exists, but yeah, but well, queen c8, king h7, rook f7 doesn't work, because this is checkmate. This is one thing. The second is that if we take with a queen, we are likely to lose. It's obvious. But if we take with a rook, then queen bishop e4 cannot be played. There is a pin, and also we can just take the bishop on e4 if it was possible. So f6 doesn't work. Bishop h6 for that, because of that. But there is a rook covering the 7th rank. So take on d5 now. Yes, we do give up the control over the light squares. But it looks safe because now this is hanging, and once it happens, look at the enemy pieces. It's a pin. That's why bishop c1 with a tempo. The position becomes equal. Maybe even it favors black because of a potential danger of this king. What do you think? So black has extra pawn. I don't think it matters much. What do you think black should do in this position? Queen b6. Queen b6, rook e8. No, rook e8 is a problem because you cannot block with the bishop because of checkmate on g8. So queen b6, rook e8. If the knight blocks, then you open the h file. Bishop d4. Bishop d4, what about rook d4? Because I think you give up too much. So bishop d4, rook d4, then you play rook g7. But I take on b2, and now if you take there, I take with my rook, and it's almost a checkmate. Well, of course, it's not a checkmate. Maybe that is. Let me see. So take, knight f6. So which move to play? Rook e8 or rook g8? What do you think, guys? Rook g6 now. So everything is winning. But what's the best? So let's say rook e8, queen e8, bishop f6, king h7. And then you can play this move with a checkmate. So queen takes, rook takes, it's over. So I think that's the best. But everything is winning. Take rook first. Take rook first. So rook d4, you mean this? No, but then I take there and rook g7 fails. I can do this move. So you mean knight f6? Looks reasonable. But it should be losing. I think rook e8 works, but let's just play something simple. I don't think queen survives. So this is problem. So where are the queen moves? Queen b8. Take. No, well, it's losing. It's losing, so the bishop can go that way. So it's possible to defend the king successfully. Fine. But also rook e8. Rook e8, queen e8. Then bishop f6. There is still a pin. There is queen e1. This is the only hope. And king h2 in this position. And this fails because it leads to a queen straight, after which the king simply moves, but this pin exists. So queen d2, bishop here. Looks like we defended. Is there a better way to play? No, I don't think so. So actually, this, and it's over. Yeah, it's over. Even rook e8 works. Okay, fine. So bishop d4 doesn't work, but what works? Rook b4 works. Queen f6, queen f6 we sacrifice. This move works. So this, and now bishop e5. So trying to set a fortress, also vacating the g7 for the rook. King h1, rook d4, closing the file, rook takes, c takes. Well, again, instead of rook d4, rook g7 was better. This is what black missed. There's this, bishop f4 trying to trade it, d3, and this is a blunder. Then just rook e7, the rooks are traded, and this is a passed pawn, and white is likely to lose because of that. Moreover, I think in case of rook e7, it's queen d5, because now once the king moves there, it's a check, which allows us to win a rook like that. And if it's another check, then queen c5, and we still win the rook. So d3, f6 was played, but d2. So it's a dangerous pawn. Bishop takes d2 and queen takes f6. I think it's finally was, this position was finally equalized. Rook c1, queen f8. Why queen f8? To cover the back rank, of course. Queen takes h4. Rook goes to c7. It's not a blunder because queen f1 is a checkmate once this rook gets distracted. So that's why rook g7, they traded and agreed to a draw. Well, it is a draw because after this move, it's just possible to capture on e4. And what do we have? Approximately equal position with a huge chances to deliver a perpetual check for both players. Well, black could play better if here they found rook g7. That was a more promising line. But anyway, let's take a look at the very beginning. So you see your opponent wants to open the position here with f5. How to avoid the pawn trade? You can avoid it if you can push the pawn. Sometimes you can even sacrifice such a pawn, but keep the f file closed because there is enemy pawn at that file. So here, for example, it is important because the enemy knight doesn't go to f5. And you keep finally both files closed. Then the task is to activate your pieces and secure your king. So bringing the king there, doing rook g7 should be your plan. Together with these ideas, you can initiate some attacking actions to force your opponent to defend, maybe, if it's not so risky, for example. But remember about this feature. So try to not exchange pawns because pawns are required to cover your king's position. Okay, finally, we have one last example. Before we continue, I would like to remind you that these workshops are free. But however, if you want to donate and support me financially, there is such an option. You can use this link. Let me copy the link for you. So you can donate through PayPal if you use this link. It's easy. You can click this button and enter the amount you want to donate, and then click the PayPal button, after which you are redirected to your PayPal account, and then you can transfer your money automatically to my account. The second option is Wise. If you have Wise, you can do it too. So you're using this link. For example, Wise is common for Europeans and people who live in the United Kingdom. If you have this account on Wise, you can do it through Wise. Just use this link and then enter your account and choose the amount that you want to donate. Okay, let's continue. This is our last example. What do we have here? So the black king is under attack. There are no squares to move it. So these are not available. This is attacked. This is attacked by the queen. So just one check and the game is over. But it's black to move. And probably they can still save the position of the king. What do you think? How black should play here? So, okay, I'm listening to your suggestions. Rook takes h2, e takes f4. So, perfect. E takes f4, rook h2, queen. Okay, so if you can take there and they take, then rook h2 works. So this, rook h2 wins the game. It's checkmate. But if you start with rook h2, it doesn't win the game because here the king escapes. You can, of course, continue with this move, which still does make a lot of sense because you threaten with this and there are no checks. But there is a possibility of saving the game. For example, queen f3, you can still take there, king h1, and queen h4 this time is not a checkmate because they can play queen h3. Okay, so let's give some time to Brian to think about this position. Of course, here, in such a complicated position, if it was a standard game, probably a chess player, doesn't matter which level he was, should spend about 10-15 minutes. So let me explain something to you. So for example, well, rook h2 as an attack doesn't work. Black should mainly focus on how to secure the king. In order to secure the king, it does make sense to decrease the number of attacking pieces that white can use into the attack and let the king to and provide the king with some extra squares. So what do you think? Okay, so e takes f4 makes a lot of sense because it allows the king to go to g5 then. Okay, so Brian suggests bishop e7 to let the king to escape to these two positions. So I like queen c4 with queen g8 idea here. Maybe I'll play better, queen b5. So I'm threatening here and maybe there. Is there a counterplay? Well, something like that won't work, I believe. And then I take on e7 with a check. So king h5. This rook g6, but you lose the bishop. Yeah, looks like bishop e7 is not enough. This move should be fine. So if they take, they lose. That's why queen f3. But bishop takes e3. So they don't have these pawns and the king got extra square on g5 to escape. And there is always a threat of doing this. So once the queen gets distracted, rook h2 works perfectly well. That's why they play h3 to prevent it. Now, what do you think which move black has to play in order to defend his position? So black is still in the trouble and still has to find the only moves. Bishop c5, bishop c5. Queen b2, rook h5 with rook g5. Also rook h5 vacates the h6 square. So rook h5, I don't think it's the best option because we can play that move. Rook f7 is a threat. Or maybe bishop b5 is a better move because bishop e8 is a threat. And if let's say king h6 in this position, Ah, then rook g8. Oh, rook g8 works perfectly well, actually. Okay, maybe rook g5 is a better move. Then it can be this. Okay, no, it can be this. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, what if we just play rook c7 and rook c6? So rook g3, let's say, to stop rook g6, rook c6, I mean. Queen b7. Yeah, queen b7 seems like a problem because there is no such an attack that black can initiate, and rook c6 is still a problem, rook h7 is a problem, bishop f7 is a threat, and doing something like that is of course a blunder because of check. So now the king has to go to h5 or g5. I think this is safer, but then check this and another check and it's over. So, well, actually this can be played. No, it's not enough. So take, check this, game over. Yeah, queen a8 also was interesting. So, seems to be too slow. Well, just playing this move and centralizing the queen should be enough. Okay, so rook h4. I thought you misspell it and you wanted to play rook h5. Okay, let's talk about rook h4. So rook h4, rook c7. So rook g4 fails. So that's why king g5. Rook g4, rook c6, you lose a queen. And I'm not sure that maybe I can even take because this is not checkmate. And if you take there, then the king is under attack. So rook g4 don't work. But okay, rook c7, well, queen b2. I don't like it. Let's see what can happen then. There is no checkmate at the moment, so maybe queen a8. The second option is rook c6. Okay, queen e8, threatening with this. And this is how I eliminate these moves. Because queen f6 pin, and two other options are unavailable. And this is my next move, after which I play this. Queen c6 works. Okay, I don't see how queen c6 works. Queen c6, queen f6, for example. I don't see how it works. I don't know how to continue. Ah, queen e8, king h6, and then rook c6. Yes, now I see. And if this move, take here. Aha, queen g6. Check. This saving the rook. Yeah, well, I don't think that queen c6 works so well. Queen e8. Rook. Oh, yeah. Yeah, rook g7. Okay. And if I play with the king there, then rook c6 works. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Rook g7. Rook g7 should win the game here. Queen b2 first. When? Okay, so now rook h4 requires a lot of calculation, but finally it doesn't work. So queen e5. Queen b2 was played in the game, and we can discuss it, but I think queen e5 is enough here. First of all, I move the queen away from the sixth rank. Second, I do not allow the queen to go to d5. How white can continue the attack? This is not playable. It's a blunder. So maybe queen c6, but then king g5. Rook g7 is not available. I can escape to h4 and then block with queen f6. Yeah, it's a relatively safe position for the king. It's definitely much safer than it was before. Queen b2 was played in the game, and that was an accuracy. Queen d5. So the king is in the trouble. Black continued with queen b3, but that was already a mistake. However, white didn't take advantage of this mistake, and white continued with queen d7. How should black play instead of queen b3? King g5, you're absolutely right. King g5 and then try to escape. So queen f7, for example, and maybe bishop c5, covering this square. So this is not a threat. Maybe queen g8, then I don't want to play rook g6, but maybe I have to. Queen takes, this is coming. So, queen f2 is a perfect move. So h4, queen h4. Queen e7 leads to a perpetual check, according to what I see. Okay, at least. Fine. So king g5 was a very good move, that's right, but the game continued with queen b3, and again in this position just queen e5 was enough, threatening with rook here, then queen f5 and the quick checkmate. If, for example, the queen goes to g8 to support g7, then bishop d3, and now f5 is lost. For example, you can defend it with this move, but now the king cannot escape to h5. That's why bishop c4 can be played. So if the queen gets distracted, queen g7 leads to checkmate. If queen f8, just bishop f7 is okay. But white continued with queen d7. And after that, they agreed to a draw. So why is it a draw? Well, queen c3, let's say. How to attack? Queen f7, king g5. But then the queen is able to defend on the dark squares, and the white's attack is not sufficient. Maybe queen here makes more sense, but again, rook g7 is not available. So queen d8, even if this move finally becomes available, there is rook g6, or there is even king h4, and the king escapes. So that's why they agreed to a draw. Fine. So in all these cases, what we were trying to do, we were trying to, when we were under the attack, we were trying to decrease attacking potential of our opponent. On one example, we rejected to exchange the pawns from our pawn cover, but mainly we were trying to get rid of the enemy attacking pieces. So we decrease this attacking potential by exchanging enemy pieces that participate in the attack. For example, okay, so for example, it was here when we played knight d5 and bishop f6. Here in the last example, we took this pawn, allowing our king to escape to g5. In the very first example, we could hide our king on b1, and the enemy pawn was covering it, which allowed us to speed up development and finally trap the knight. And in this example, so first, when we were anticipating the attack on the king side, we set a defensive setup, a kind of a fortress on the king side, and continued our plan on the queen side, which is a pawn march due to space advantage on the queen side. So in order to successfully implement these ideas in your games, you have to anticipate the enemy plan. You have to predict what your opponent is doing. How can you do it? Depends on the moves that he plays. Always ask yourself why he's playing this or that move. What does he want? What is his plan? And do you need to parry this plan, or at least get prepared for this plan? Or you think the plan is weak and you can just completely ignore it and play what you were originally thinking about. So if you see that some actions are required, try to make his plan as much difficult as possible by preparing, by doing prophylaxis. Okay, fine. So we are done for today. I hope to see everyone next Sunday at our next workshop. I'm going to send an announcement this week, definitely. And I also invite you to our group lessons that we are going to start a new cycle in the beginning of June. See you then. Bye bye.